Harry, we want to say goodnight to you.
Welcome to the New York Times podcast, This Doesn't Usually Happen to People Like Me. Of music, news, and criticism, I am your host, John Caramonica. Things are, in fact, always as it was, as it will be, as it forever will be, which is to say that Beyoncé did not win any Grammys at the major categories at the 65th Annual Grammy Awards, which we all watched last night, sort of, stayed up, wrote about last night. And here we are, Monday afternoon to post-game. Because it's the Grammys episode, because it's music's biggest night, is also the biggest night for Popcast shirts. I'm going to knock a few dollars off of the Popcast shirt price to clear out inventory. There are not many left, but please, it's the popcast.myshopify.com. If you've been sitting on it, if you've been agonizing over it, now's the time because they're not going to be around very much longer. So it's the popcast.myshopify.com, and I will hand mail them out to you. And now, Lindsay Zoladz is here.
John Caramonica, the artist of my life.
Not untrue. Not untrue. Honestly, the funniest thing last night was when people said music's biggest night on Slack. And you said, no, it's Slack's biggest night because it's the one night a year John is on Slack.
It's big.
Big facts. John Pareles is here. JP.
I'm slacking.
Joe Coscarelli is here. Joe, how's your Wi-Fi today?
It seems strong. I don't know. What's it looking like on your end? Pedro said I'm coming through crystal clear.
It's looking as strong as the Grammys' commitment to hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about everything that happened last night. We're going to talk about the big awards. We're going to talk about the hip hop history lesson review in the middle of the show. But let's kind of get the boring stuff out of the way, which is Harry Styles won Album of the Year. Lizzo won Record of the Year. Bonnie Raitt won Song of the Year. Beyoncé won Nothing of the Year, apparently. Beyoncé did not have a meaningful record. Renaissance was not that important. Lindsay, I was frankly a little bit surprised, given that they had super fans for each of the individuals nominated for Album of the Year. I was a little bit surprised to not see your mother up there.
I mean, you and me both.
In watching the ceremony last night, did your mom watch the woman who was the Harry Styles superfan find her home address and send some kind of like violent bomb through the mail to that woman? Should we be on the lookout for that in the coming days?
She did admit to me that she was jealous and has brought it out this morning as well. I had the joy of watching the Grammys with both of my parents.
Did that detract from her, I assume, untrammeled joy at Harry Styles' victory? Perhaps the only person we collectively, individually, personally know who experienced untrammeled joy at that victory.
I wouldn't say it was untrammeled, and I think that was because of the performance that preceded it.
High key mid.
Even my mom, who is a diehard Harry fan, could not support that. Just very low energy. I'm curious what we think was going on there. I know that some artists were having issues, it seemed like, with the in-ear monitors, but I also don't think that really excused what we saw. Like, the charisma was not coming through in that performance. You know, he seemed not really like in his body in a way that was confusing to me. Like, I think if you are not familiar with the Harry Styles experience and had not
also,
seen him in concert as John and I did at Madison Square Garden, I think he would kind of be like
my greatest nights of 2022.
Exactly. I think you would be puzzled by the whole thing. So I think that didn't really help sell what was a pretty surprising Album of the Year win. I think if he had knocked that performance out of the park, there would perhaps have been a little less backlash today. But I think it was a particularly uninspired performance.
JP, look, every year the Grammys happen. Every year something stupid happens. And every year we say, JP, you've been around to see a lot of stupid things happen at the Grammys. On the scale of 0 to berzoinks, where does Harry Styles winning Album of the Year fall?
I'd put it at about an 8 because there is Grammy logic, kind of an oxymoron behind this, which is to say it's an old-fashioned album that employs lots of studio musicians and they have digital dexterity that they've worked very hard
it
on.
employs them. It definitely employs them.
Ben Cesario said on one of our podcasts, the Grammys like new music that sounds like old music. And boy, does it sound like old music. But it's something that the craftsmen who vote on the Grammys still prize. They still want fast fingers. They still want acoustic instruments. They still want old-fashioned musical dexterity. And I guess they assume that the Beyoncé album is just spit out by a computer.
Which is lunacy, because the Beyoncé album is so much, to me, it is so much more old-fashioned than the Harry Styles record, if we're really going to get in the weeds on this as a concept. Joe, you've spent the last 3 minutes just vigorously shaking your head horizontally. I don't even know what you're mad about anymore. You want to give like an omnibus spark notes of all the things that are upsetting you right now?
Yeah, just give me a second, because I feel safer than I ever have to speak out against Harry Styles this morning, when I think, as Lindsay said, even Harry Styles fans are sort of like, oh, like, sorry, you know?
Yeah.
At least he didn't apologize.
But he basically did. His his presence is an apology. And I think that actually what Lindsay was describing, I think that what Lindsay was describing is not an off night for Harry Styles. It is Harry Styles out of context, which is just mid. Look, like, you know, when you really love like a movie or a TV show or a song or a comedian, and then you like excitedly show it to a friend, and then it dawns on you in real time, like, oh, this isn't as good as I thought it was. And you start to like cringe at yourself. That is Harry Styles being taken out of the Harry Styles bubble. And like, this guy is like, he is the musical equivalent of his diving swallows tattoos. Like, he is just not like, he's just not a star. And I think that if anything, I mean, he is a star, of course, but he is Corey Haim. He is not Justin Timberlake. And I think that if anything,
the Haim hive is really going to come up. First of all, I do want to just qualify one thing, which is I learned something about you today.
Mm-hmm.
I would never show a comedian to a friend. Like, what an appalling concept. Like, first of all, I would never patronize a comedian, first of all. Secondarily, I would never be like, hey, buddy, come here.
Check out this joke.
Yeah. Check out this routine, this bit.
I just think
he workshopped the hell out of it.
When you think something is funny and then you show someone else and you realize it's not funny, that's like one of the most mortifying feelings in the world. And to me, that is like the Harry Styles on national TV experience. But I think in the long term, what this Grammys win is going to do is like correct to the record on Harry Styles' music, because nobody will ever think that it could possibly be a great album because it won Album of the Year at the Grammys.
Wow.
And I'm not even a Renaissance person. I don't even think that Renaissance is necessarily the runaway favorite in this category. Like, you're looking at this Bad Bunny album, which is maybe not even the best Bad Bunny album, but certainly in the top 1 or 2 albums in this category, both in terms of import and meaning and symbolism, and also in terms of music. I just think what we saw at these Grammys was the show catching up to what people want it to be, and the voters just lagging like 5 to 7, if not more, years behind. And I think that's going to continue to be an issue as they try to do this. No, look at us. We're progressive. Look at us. We love Black music. We love this hip hop thing that you guys are doing. And yet, like JP says, you're only going to win if your credits are short and they have guitars in them.
All right, let me ask this question. The main awards, the 4 main categories, including Best New Artist, were sort of, in my mind, conspicuously spread around. No conspiracy theory, no whatever, no like calories aren't real conspiracy theory, whatever. Just, do we think that there's something a tiny bit revealing or potentially shenaniganish about the spread here? Because you have Lizzo. First, also Lizzo did not, strictly speaking, apologize for beating Beyonce, but did acknowledge Beyonce. You have Samara Joy in Best New Artist, a jazz musician. We talked about her a couple weeks ago on the 2022 Jazzcast. Very lovely record, but ultimately somewhat of a tepid record. Very safe choice for quote unquote serious music people. And then Bonnie Raitt, who like no one's going to argue with except for like 12-year-olds on Twitter, but Bonnie Raitt, but who I don't think was anybody's notion of like a runaway favorite prior to this. Does something feel pointed about the way that these main awards were parceled out? And should we listen to the Bonnie Raitt song? JP, why don't you talk for a sec about the Bonnie Raitt song that won Song of the Year?
It's a character study song, like a John Prine song. It's folky, it's quiet, it's about a young man turns up on an old woman's doorstep and tells her that he's the one who got her son's transplanted heart. And she listens to her son's heart beating in this person's chest. It's kind of a heartwarming song. I'm not sad that it won, whether it is the blockbuster song of the year, world historical song. I don't know, but it's a good song.
This is Bonnie Raitt, Just Like That.
Just like that, your life can change if I hadn't looked away. My boy might still be with me now. He'd be 25 today. No knife can carve away the stain. No drink.
JP, what do you make then of both of Bonnie's win, but also the way that these awards were broadly speaking parceled out?
I think the problem is they've expanded those categories. So you can win with a plurality. It's the same as a crowded presidential primary. You don't know what you're going to get because a concentrated minority bloc can take it. I mean, I'm kind of glad Bonnie Raitt won over A, B, C, D, E, F, U.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some real stinkers in that category.
Yo,
Gail being put up against Bonnie Raitt is just the problem with the Grammys in a nutshell, right? Like,
or the most quintessential Grammy thing.
When Gail wins the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2059, and we do the podcast that year, which of course we will, because where else will we be? When Gail wins the Lifetime Achievement Award, we will play a clip from this episode about how we did not believe in Gail. Sorry, I'm just going to put that out there.
With Gail's late period, John Prine inspired
absolutely,
folk ballad.
Yes. Where she comes out, where she performs with the Bonnie Raitt hair, like the homage Bonnie Raitt hair. You know what I mean?
I mean,
like,
she's already got the two-tone hair. They do have more in common style-wise than we're realizing.
It's us who lack vision.
Collaborate now.
You know who gave me two-tone hair? God did.
That's the missing verse.
There we go. There we go. Put me next to OG Juan at the table. And yeah, Pedro, you could keep that joke. You better keep that joke, as a matter of fact.
I love it. John, I want to go back to what you were saying about the way that the main awards were spread out, because I think that is as much a function of who and how people are voting, even more so than any probably shenanigans. The most telling thing that I learned in this round of Grammy reporting was some figures that we got about the voting membership by genre, which I'd never seen before, which I thought, again, was very telling. This is what they gave us. They say that the demographics that there's more than 30% new underrepresented communities or minorities or whatever they call it. But by genre, they remain fixed with pop at 23%, jazz, the second biggest block, at 16%, rock at 15%, which is separate from alternative, which has 10%. So if you combine those two, rock remains the biggest category. American roots is at 13%. R&B is at 15%.
Which is also like rock.
Classical is at 10%, and rap is not even on the list, meaning that it has under 10%, but we don't know how much.
So basically, jazz and American roots music is basically like Wyoming in the Senate. A disproportionate, like a
that's
disproportionate.
What I'm saying. So when you see these numbers, like this is the first time that the Grammy winners have ever made sense. Like when you just realize that if this is how people are identifying, 25% of people are identifying as either rock or alternative as a voter, then how is Beyonce ever going to win Album of the Year, let alone a rap album? Like it makes sense.
Before we move away from the main awards, let's listen to a little Samara Joy, who won, 10% of voters are jazz voters. So there's 10%. I mean, I'm sure jazz voters have
right?
16. Sorry, 16
of voters.
Yeah.
So that's basically, in Grammy context, that's practically a majority. So let's listen to something off the Samara Joy album. The albums linger a while. Let's listen to I'm Confessing That I Love You.
Day and night you're on my mind, but do you really care? To you I'm just a friend. Seems like it'd be better if I never say a thing. Keep all my feelings to myself, but just hearing you speak makes my heart.
Okay, so Karen and I were talking last night, 3:30, 4 in the morning, finishing up the edit on my piece about whether Beyonce and by extension Jay-Z ever returned to the Grammys, like for anything, literally for any, even if the Grammys are like burning, do they show up with a cup of water to put out the fire? And I think what we kind of landed on is that they probably do not. Beyonce has done the thing that I guess is maybe one thing that had eluded her, which is winning the most Grammys, although there's still the thing of major categories. Jay-Z went from boycotting the Grammys 20 some odd years ago to forcing everybody to watch him rap for 5 minutes straight after all the show was actually done. No shots. Very exciting to see Jay-Z
Good
rap
rapping,
5 minutes.
great rapping.
Good rapping.
Yeah.
Great. Like genuinely
Jay was
like
having fun last
Jay's
night.
having
I
a
haven't
great
seen
night.
him that happy.
Yeah.
He was happy to see The Rock.
Yeah, rapping along to Method Man, like super into it. Also, I don't know if you guys saw the backstage footage of Jay-Z like hugging Rakim.
Yeah, amazing. Great stuff.
like thanking him for the roads that he paved. If Jay-Z is going to be an institutionalist, you may have an issue with how he handled the Barclays and the Nets stuff and all this other stuff, or the NFL thing. But like, if Jay-Z is going to be an institutionalist, this is the kind of institutionalist I'm interested in Jay-Z being, which is being a very vocal and enthused advocate for the inclusion of hip hop in a thing like the Grammys, as long as the Grammys are a thing that we are contractually forced to care about. On God, I have no idea where the hell I was going with this.
But then you were just saying that he's never going to come back.
He's never going to come back. Right. There's nothing left.
I would have said that after the 444 Grammys when he said F the Grammys on that O for H. Like he won no awards. He's another one, but even before Beyonce, has won upwards of 24 times, but never in a non-genre category.
I guess a related question I was wondering, while we're talking about sort of the voting pool and the Beyonce of it all, is like, do you think there is a faction of Grammy voter that is so sick of hearing this narrative of Beyonce being deserving of more that there is this like backlash actively against voting for her? Like it's gotten to the point where you almost have to wonder that. Like, I do understand the voting splitting and things like that, but if you're sort of run-of-the-mill Grammy voter, are you tired of being told that it's your social responsibility to vote for Beyonce? Like, I wonder if there is some fatigue of that whole narrative. And I realized this time around that didn't quite take hold until voting had already closed. And there was this lead up and this sense that anything less than, sweeping the major categories was going to be a failure for her. But I do wonder if there's sort of a quiet backlash against this idea. I mean, they did, she was handed wins in genre categories, but at what point has this just become its own narrative that people are either on board for or pushing back against?
Just out of pure curiosity, if you have a ballot in this category for album of the year, if you have a ballot, are you voting for Renaissance in this year? Like, no bigger picture questions, no correcting historical wrongs. Let's say Beyonce already has the title for most awarded. Like, purely, are you voting for Renaissance?
Yes. And I'm also scribbling out Coldplay on the ballot and writing in Motomami instead because, good God.
JP, are you voting for Renaissance?
I did. I put it on the top of my list. But I do think there are some people who are going to be too cool for school. Or who assume, everybody else is going to vote.
Those people
for
do not
Beyonce.
vote for Grammys. No one in the Grammys is too cool for school. No, they go to school.
Or they're
they're staying in school.
John, what would you have voted for?
I'm looking at it now. It's probably Beyonce, but maybe on some days it's Bad Bunny. If somehow the Bad Bunny record was 6 songs shorter, it's the Bad Bunny record.
I had talked to some people that kind of thought Bad Bunny might be the big upset this year, that they were going to finally do a bit of that mea culpa as well.
Can we listen briefly to El Apagón, which is one of the songs that Bad Bunny performed, and it's from El Verano Sin Ti? This is El Apagón.
Maldita sea, otro apagón, vamos pa' los bleachers a prender un blon. Antes que a Pipo le dé un bofetón, Puerto Rico está en cabrón, ey, estoy en cabrón, Puerto Rico está en cabrón, ey, pichea Maldiva, yo me quedo en Palomino.
When the nominations came out, JP, you made what I thought was an excellent, if sort of depressing point, that I think the way that you realize these Bad Bunny nominations in the major categories were more tokenism than anything is that they nominate Moscow Mule, which is the first track on the album, goes to show that and not the best one, which shows like most of them did not listen deep enough to this record to even have like an outlier pick of it. Like, I don't think there was deep engagement. I mean, I would love to know like the percentage of Grammy voters that speak Spanish too. I don't think it's that. This was the first all Spanish language, record to be nominated for Album of the Year. And that's huge. But I think that's an incredible barrier to some of these people in really engaging with this music on the level that, the less demanding level that Harry's House asks from them, I think is going to be appealing to some people that don't really want to sit with this Bad Bunny record, as depressing as that is.
And also the Bad Bunny record, for its flaws, some similarity in my mind to Renaissance, taking in like a very vast survey of a broad category of music, incredibly dexterous and careful production, thoughtful about how it connects seemingly disparate threads within the Spanish language music like universe, in a way that Renaissance is thoughtful about how it connects different forms of dance music, different generations, different regional styles of dance music, so on and so forth. I think that's right. And Joe, just to go back to the numbers that you were talking about before, if rap doesn't even have 10%, if rap, which is the actual biggest genre of music in popular music, doesn't even have 10% of voters, Spanish language music, I mean, of all those voters, I assume are voting for Latin Grammys, but the increasing presence of Spanish language music on American pop radio, streaming, et cetera, where are those performers? Where are those producers? They aren't clearly not voting for regular Grammys as opposed to Latin Grammys. So how could someone like Bad Bunny even be in a position to win? I think that's totally fair. And Joe, I assume that lines up with what you were talking about in your reporting.
The other thing to note about these numbers is that these are eligible voters. This doesn't mean people are actually turning in ballots. Look at the country. We've talked about this before. Like, people don't vote when it actually matters. So, like, you can just imagine that the number of people actually voting out of this, whatever, 11,000 is potentially minuscule. We just don't know. And you can also think about, of those genre breakdowns, who are the people who are reliably voting? If we look at stuff like Best New Artist, which often has a huge jazz contingent, we can see that those people are voting a lot. Like, you can see think of Brandy Carlisle popping up so many times over and over again over the last few years. Like, you can see whose contingents are reliable. But then going back to something that Lindsay was saying,
this is like senior citizens showing up for jury duty is what you're saying.
Exactly. Or for the polls. I mean, going back to what Lindsay was saying about the Beyonce narrative being almost like overheated in some way, I think Variety does their little anonymous ballots, which are typical for the Oscars, but people have started doing them more and more for music. And there was someone who literally said, oh, Beyonce wins all the time. Like, I can't vote for her album of the year. I think people just assume, because especially the show has made such a big deal out of her winning the last couple of years. Like, remember, she was the star of the COVID Grammys with Megan Thee Stallion, even though she didn't have an album out. They were just like drooling over her in anticipation probably for this year's show to make sure she would show up again. So you do get this idea that Beyonce is being rewarded when she really isn't. The last thing I will say, voting wise, is that I do think the Grammys could benefit by a ranked choice ballot, which is how the Oscars do it. It leads to its own screwiness. But imagine, like, okay, say your number one is Harry's House. your number 2 is still probably some combination of Bad Bunny, Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar. And if it's number 2 across the board, no matter what you're putting at number 1, you can still end up with a win. So I wouldn't be surprised if the demographics are not catching up as quickly as the Recording Academy wants, if they start to put their thumb on the scales to mess with how the votes are counted in some way like that.
Don't you think there's a chance that the powers that be look at the spread of the main awards, look at the overall show, and just sort of say, not bad, not perfect, but not bad?
Yeah, like, I don't know that they care at this point.
And also the thing that you said about the voter who was like, Beyonce's won 100 times. To go back to Lindsay's point about there being a backlash, I actually wonder if more voters are not backlashing against Beyonce, but are actually misinformed about the ways in which Beyonce has had Grammy success. And again, this should not be an entire episode about how can we somehow cosmically connect Beyonce with an Album of the Year Grammy. It's not that. But I do feel, my gut tells me there are probably more people who are saying Beyonce always wins than saying I'm backlashing against being told to give Beyonce a Grammy that she has not won. That'd be my guess. I don't know. These people read the Left Set's letter. You know what I mean? Like, this is not like people living on Twitter.
Though Harvey Mason Jr., the chief executive of the Recording Academy, I think he still feels the heat. He is a Black music producer. He's friends with these people. He has made it his mission publicly to say, we're sorry, we're catching up. And maybe this will lead us into talking about the hip hop segment. But, he is really the one trying to say, I am not Neil Portnow. And yet his results are still Portnow-esque. And I don't think that gives him the best night of sleep.
Let's take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to pivot to talking about hip hop. Let's go with something from the rap album, the best rap album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. It's Kendrick Lamar. He is the her of the rap album category. Very relieved that we didn't have to see Jack Harlow find a way to talk about Kendrick Lamar on stage. Much as I like Jack Harlow, I just was not emotionally prepared for that. So I'm glad that we avoided that. Let's listen to a little bit of Rich Spirit.
Good song.
From Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. We'll be back in a minute.
Frat brother, real brother, that brother. We dress up the score, give me that brother. Spirit medium, on rap brother. We headed there now, are you strapped brother? Ay, peacemaker, but I'm not naive brother. Ay, gotta watch your homies and police brother. Ay, cloud chasing, hell of a disease brother. I'm fasting, 4 days out the week brother. I pray to God that you realize.
I do want to say there's an argument to be made that Kendrick Lamar is equally, if not more, wronged than Beyonce. Not only has he lost 4 Album of the Years in a row, but he lost a 5th one because of the Black Panther soundtrack, which was nominated a couple of years ago.
Do you want to talk at length about the corrective that needs to be issued to Kendrick Lamar?
No, I'm just saying that, if Kendrick Lamar had a beehive, they could be really mad today.
He's riding his beach bikes. He's not worried. The great thing about Kendrick Lamar, not pressed, which I admire. Beyonce low-key pressed.
Underrated moment of the night. Kendrick got some jokes off in his speech.
Yeah,
I love when Kendrick's funny.
Kendrick's funny.
Yes.
I know, he's just not on record at all.
Yeah,
no. I liked his speech.
We'll always love Kendrick for shouting out Mozzie randomly last time he won a Grammy on stage. He's just like, he does what he wants.
Shout out Mozzie. Speaking of Mozzie, one of my favorite parts of the long 12 or 13 minute history of hip hop thing was the list of rappers on the screen.
All I saw was D12.
D12 was there, but also there was I want to say whoever did that, I feel like I know them because there were like Blue was on there, Merce was on there, like a bunch of random backpack rappers in the 2000s were on there, a lot of regional rappers, big famous people, very obscure. I think Choppa was on there, like Choppa, like from Making the Band, like
amazing.
Choppa, like biggest look for Choppa in 15 years. Anyway, Joe, you want to give us a little bit of context because you did some reporting on how this all came together. For me, there are a lot of indelible moments, as it will not surprise anybody to know. Every year the Grammys roll around and I I just take a deep sigh and say, what terrible thing am I going to have to say about hip hop at the Grammys this year, and how the Grammys have dropped the ball and fumbled this irredeemably. And I was tense. And you know what? I had a lovely time for 12 minutes. I had a phenomenal time seeing the Lox do We Gonna Make It, seeing Too Short, seeing Nelly scream what Too Short's favorite word is, along with Too Short on the Grammys. Just a phenomenal, cross-generational, inter-regional success stories. It made me feel good, and I didn't even feel bad about feeling good. It would bring me a lot of joy to hear Ice-T rapping New Jack Hustler, Nino's theme, and also Method Man rapping Method Man.
Then I switch to sucker punk cop. Move like a king when I roll hop. You try to flex, bang, another sucker drop. You gotta deal with this, cause there's no way out. Why? Cash money ain't never gonna play out.
M-E-T-H-O-D, man. M-E-T-H-O-D, man. M-E-T-H-O-D, man. M-E-T-H-O-D, man. Hey, you get off.
I mean, the choices were really, they were spot on. They were not the most obvious choices.
No, they were for the heads.
As you brought up, Joe, I mean, Questlove does do DJ sets. I mean, that was a DJ set with 2 turntables and 33 rappers. The
flow of the pacing, but the way the different songs that flowed into each other felt very thoughtful, and which I'm as you found out, Joe, like up until the last minute, he was figuring out who was going to be there and who wasn't. So to pull that off as seamlessly as he did, it's really impressive.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, I don't know if you guys saw this on social media, but apparently only in Atlanta it went to commercial in the middle of the segment and cut off specifically Big Boy doing AC Aliens.
No.
Incredible.
Which feels like a real cosmic slap in the face.
God. Absolute madness.
My aunt was texting me, oh my God, why did it go to commercial break? And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Leave me alone, I'm working.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad. It really wasn't bad.
It wasn't bad. Yes, it wasn't bad.
It's shocking. I talked to Questlove last week as they were sort of putting together what they hoped were the finishing touches. He was like, after this call, I have to get on with Lil Uzi Vert and try to convince him that this isn't like an AARP convention, he was like, I really need him for my grand finale. It has to be From the Bronx to TikTok. So, but I think, there are people who maybe at this point roll their eyes whenever it's Questlove presents. But I do think he is possibly the only person on the planet who could have put together this version of the thing.
Not even Jay. I mean, Jay wouldn't. Jay would never lift a finger to do it. But Jay couldn't do it.
Puffs would be totally different because he wouldn't be able to divorce ego from it. You know what I mean? Or Dre. We saw Dre's version at the Super Bowl last year. It was great, but it's it's not the same.
It's a very narrow sliver.
Yeah, Questlove is just a rap nerd. And he really leaned into that. He was like, I don't want the Captain Obvious moments. He didn't want to start with Rapper's Delight. It was really important to him that Flash was playing the beatbox, the drum machine, as opposed to just scratching. He said to me, he was like, oh, if the Beasties see this, they're going to go nuts. He was trying to please his friends. And that's the coolest way to do anything creative, is to try to impress the people that you care about. And I think this was never going to be perfect. 12, 15 minutes for 50 years. People have noted that they jumped from the Lox to Lil Baby, and my whole life happened in between that gap. But but they did their best, and would have been cool to see Future and Wayne up there. They were supposed to be in. He wanted Will Smith to be in it, which would have been, I think, an amazing moment. But even as is, I thought it turned out really solid.
Let's listen to a little bit of that outro with Lil Uzi Vert, Just Wanna Rock.
50th anniversary of hip hop.
One thing that I did take away from a musical perspective from this thing, there's more in common between Just Wanna Rock and Rock the Bells than I would have thought about on my own. And literally hearing those two relatively close to each other, admittedly, near the beginning and then at the end, and then watching LL stand behind Uzi as Uzi is hitting those moves, and me thinking about the kind of like the tinny persistence of Rock the Bells and of so many records of that Rick Rubin, Larry Smith era, like so on and so forth. Like I was really, really struck. Not that things are full circle, things are weird. I don't think there's like some conscious connection between those things, but sounds get recontextualized and pop up again in unexpected ways and unexpected places. And I was very struck by how those two records and something from 1984 or 6 or whatever, and something from 2022, 23 actually felt formally very similar. Lindsay, what were some moments from the hip hop thing that really stood out to you?
I think with hip hop in particular, this sort of war of the generations and the old heads versus the new guys like a Lil Uzi Vert or whoever the new guy was 10 years before, it just, we're so used to that narrative and that kind of like pitting eras against each other that there was such a sense of like unity and just cross-generational connections to this, that the final moment of seeing everybody on stage together and like making those little bridges between different sounds, it was really powerful and kind of there was a cohesion that I think we're not often supposed to see when we're pitting certain types of rappers against stylists or, it worked. And the pacing was good. Like,
I think, again, that's credit to Questlove as like a DJ and producer. Like he thought of this as a mix, you know what I mean? Like he thought of this as, I'm the DJ, how am I going to string all this together? And then he had to go about actually putting the puzzle pieces together, which requires, Melly Mel to show up at the same time as Lil Baby. It's an impossible feat that they somehow pulled off.
JP, what struck you about the kind of musical narrative, the musical through lines of that series of performances?
Well, there was what Lindsay brought up, that feeling of an actual community as opposed to a war of all against all. I mean, there is a feeling that each of those people was a fan of the hook that came before them in that giant medley. And I don't want to harsh your mellow, but this is kind of what they used to do with the Grammy moments.
I did get a text last night after the show from previous podcast guest and friend of the podcast, Patrick Sandberg, who said, rap finally made it to the boring legacy tribute slot at the Grammys, officially geriatric, which, yes. And the fact, I think the fact that we all know that, and we all know that that's stupid and sucks, and yet still had fun with it, that to me is the thing. Like, it was so easy to be skeptical of this thing. So easy.
I got to disagree that it's stupid, because there is a sense of continuity. There is a sense that you learn from your elders. There is a sense that you steal from your elders. And I think some of those people were, they don't sue you. They give you a split. And they put you in very fine points in the credits.
They take 80%. Then they take 80%. Yes. Shout out Sting.
Grammy moments, Sting and the estate of Juice WRLD. Yeah.
Yo, seriously, Grammy moments is Sting just reading the contract for all the people who've sampled him.
Yeah, JP, how many Motown tributes do you remember in Grammys history?
I've tried to forget, but there was one just in 2019, the J-Lo Motown tribute. Truly a classic Grammy
right.
moment.
Yeah, completely blocked that out of my mind.
Shout out Ben Affleck, though. He really held it down. He really held it down. Absolutely. He had Duncan under the table. I bet he did.
I don't think he did. That's why he looks so
That's why he looks so off.
What is Ben Affleck's favorite song?
Of all time?
Or just of the last couple of years? Do you think Ben Affleck listens to music? It's really hard to imagine.
No, definitely not.
You think he likes Måneskin?
Come on, best new artist contender.
He's a Gale guy.
Yeah, he's definitely
he's into Gale.
He definitely sent that song to Matt Damon. It was just
Hold it. Please don't forgive me for what the stove did. Nobody touched the Billy until Ho did. How many billionaires can come from whole crib? I count 3, me, A, and Ree. Bronze and Rock Boy, so 4 technically. I left the dope.
As far as other hip hop performances, let's talk a little bit to jump back to the Jay-Z thing. DJ Khaled's God Did record, which also features Rick Ross and Lil Wayne and John Letton. Man, they just, They just
Friday.
And Friday. But like Friday
with
at
two
least.
wives.
Yeah. But at least seems to sing a lot of this. They like uncrioed John Legend for this one. Man. Jay-Z at the end of the show, again, we discussed this a little bit earlier. There's something that felt a little bit pointed about it. And I wonder if the Grammys can figure out a way to make sure someone like Jay-Z keeps showing up and keeps doing baton passing and all this other stuff. Do they have any hope of existing 10, 20, 30 years from now? The notebook that I wrote was basically about how the Grammys has to find ways to take people who fancy themselves rebels or fancy themselves outsiders, or maybe even people who say, I would never show up at the Grammys, and essentially, when they become really famous, make them show up at the Grammys. Karen was very thrilled that I opened my piece with Madonna, talking about how Madonna did not win.
That was good fan service, editor service.
I know my demographic, which is Karen Gans at 3 a.m. waiting for my piece. Like, I know the demo. But then Madonna shows up, and Madonna hasn't even won like a Lifetime Achievement Award or anything. She's just won like a couple of like random off-brand Grammys. What does the Grammys become if an entire generation of rebels and outsiders sort of chooses not to show up anymore? Is there even a Grammys for us to talk about? Yeah, it's like, are we all, does that sound so nice? Did I just immediately transport you to like a beach in Maui?
But there's always an establishment. There's even among rebels, like Brandi Carlile is doing her thing, but she's going to be showing up at the Grammys until the end of time.
Not a rebel.
You know, but
not a rebel.
Yeah, but culturally, in the United States of America, like Brandi Carlile is not, Luke Combs.
I'm not going to touch that one. I'm not going to touch it.
I'm just saying, like even look at Sam Smith and Kim Petras. You guys like that song Unholy? like
I've come around on it. I've come around.
My take on Unholy. Let's listen. First of all, let's listen to a little bit of Unholy.
Daddy, if you want to drop the attic, give me love, give me Fendi, my Balenciaga. Daddy, you gonna need to bag it up, cause I'm spending on Rodeo. You can wish me back it up, I'll be gone in the AM. And he got me Prada, get me Miu Miu like Rihanna. He always call me cause I never cause no drama. And when you want it, baby, I know I got you covered.
So my take on Unholy, after spending some more time listening to it and watching the performance last night, is Unholy is like a Rocky Horror Picture Show song. It is a musical theater song. It is funny. I don't think it is intended to be funny, but it is a funny record that is masking as a kind of like ideas, like pushing boundaries record. But at core, it's just a funny record.
John, are you describing camp?
Yes, that's me and the Met Gala. That's literally what we're talking about.
I wish it was a little bit more camp. I think it doesn't go far enough for me, but that's also maybe why it won a Grammy and went to number 1 on the Billboard chart. It's an interesting song and performance to talk about in this context, because I think it's sort of the queer version of this thing that we've been talking about in other genres, of this sort of traditionalist version of a thing that is generally subversive in culture. Like, I think something that was so both poignant and kind of almost like fourth wall breaking about hearing Kim Petras talk about Sophie on the Grammy stage is that the idea of Kim Petras and Sam Smith performing a song like Unholy with this very, very like over the top devil imagery that's just like, okay, we get it. Like, it's, sinister and diabolical. To the idea of like someone like Sophie, whose music was truly radical and would have felt really radical in that context, like I think it kind of is forcing us to grapple with the fact that like we can have queer representation in a space like this. And I guess Brandi Carlile also fits into this umbrella, that there is an acceptable, like an acceptable version of these sort of fringe arts and aesthetics and ideologies. Like, I think that's something that has made Unholy both like huge and a little bit problematic for some people, like engaging in much more avant-garde and like interesting, frankly, queer art. So I think I wrote about this, but I found Kim Petras's speech incredibly moving and kind of felt like this like star-making moment for her that I don't think the song necessarily is. Like, I think her verse on that song could have been anyone, but this moment and Sam Smith knowing to cede the stage to her in that moment too felt really powerful and kind of felt like, to me, like, okay, is this what the Grammys is about more than a performance in this context? Because I think I'm going to remember that speech more than I'm going to remember the performance that they did. Which kind of brings me to another thing that I wanted to ask you guys about too, that this idea of, okay, so we have Beyonce, we have Adele, we have Taylor.
Taylor shut out? Was Taylor totally shut out?
Taylor won Best Music Video.
She won Music Video for her short film.
A short film, not a music video.
Yes, we all received the emails assuring us that this was not a music video. This is not, I promise you. If there's one thing this is not, it is not a music video, except for the purposes of the Grammys.
Just to clarify.
Except for the purposes of the Grammys, in which case it's definitely a music video. But other than that, it's definitely don't use that terminology.
It's a music video, Taylor's version, I think is what it is. No, but I something that I was thinking about, and I kind of want to go back to the sort of grand cosmic meh of the Harry Styles performance is there a way in which not performing at the Grammys, but either being there as, you know, Beyonce, Adele, and Taylor, and specifically Beyonce and Kendrick, but Beyonce and Taylor, you know, being about to embark on these massive tours that they've not yet done public performances of. Like Taylor has performed Antihero once, I think, at a 1975 concert. Beyonce famously never released any visuals or music videos for Renaissance, hasn't performed any of the Renaissance songs live yet.
Even in Dubai?
Yeah. So
even in Dubai.
I kind of
for more money than we've ever thought of in our lives.
Yeah. And even Adele, you know, performing the 30 songs only in this like destination concert that however many people have seen in Vegas, like it felt, there was a silence from them musically that felt sort of compelling and felt like, do they even need to do this performance anymore? I mean, like the market for Taylor Swift tickets and Beyonce tickets, you know, like there's so much more demand than there are. They don't need to be
the
selling.
Grammys need them way more than they need the Grammys.
So I found their presence, but sort of silence there compelling. Like this, in a previous era, I think would have been when Beyonce really like kicks off the Renaissance era and previews her tour. And honestly, the same for Taylor Swift and Midnight. So I'm curious, like, what you guys think was up there, and is this different from, you know, something in the past?
Well, I wrote this in our best worst, but like, you know, it was more important to Beyonce to post a photo on Instagram about being at the Grammys than to actually be at the Grammys. They've given a lot to the show over the years, specifically, you know, I think of Beyonce and Kendrick in this mode where like they've like really brought the house down like multiple times, you know, and then never got rewarded for it. I also think that that's the place that they are in their careers in general. Like they don't do press. They don't barely give us music videos. They like Adele doesn't even have to put out multiple singles. She's just like, you get one song from this album. Like I'll just ride it.
Oh my God, was a single.
I'll just ride it forever.
Oh my God, was a single. And drink wine. But
yeah, well, come on. You know what I mean? Yeah. They're just like, thank you, Queen. Give us nothing. Like that. It's just like
the Rihanna Dua Lipa.
First of all, Adele had a disaster performance at the Grammys. I would be spooked
multiple
to go back.
Times.
Yeah, you know, and not her fault. Technical garbage. I do think Taylor Swift was performing at the Grammys because every time anybody wanted a reaction shot, she had to perform.
Wow. Big facts.
Yes.
Big facts. Yeah, I do think that there has never been a person more aware of the creation of reaction GIFs than Taylor Swift. And I think it was not always the case. You know, we went through many years early in her career with the kind of like hand over open mouth.
The surprise face.
But then
Shout
once
out to Rich Choose
of course, mad big supercuts.
Always.
But then once she realized that was not going to fly anymore, instead of rejecting reacting altogether, instead just developed a new retinue of reactions, and he's always on call. No one, like there were moments last night where no one was dancing. Taylor Swift was dancing. No one was standing up. Taylor Swift was standing up. And
did not know the words to Bad Habit, but
who does?
Maybe that was the ultimate power move.
Literally, who does? Truly,
also,
on God, who does?
Every photo of Taylor Swift and Bad Bunny, like during the commercials, was my favorite moment.
I mean, that's the thing. She pulled it off. People aren't even mad at her for hogging that spotlight anymore because she's like gotten really good at it. Same as everything. Everyone's like, ugh.
My girl is downloading Duolingo today. Like this new era starts not like she was inspired.
All right. So Grammys 2020, Latin Grammys 2027. It's the Taylor Swift and Maluma collaborative album, Best of Both Globos or something.
When you have people like Jay-Z, Beyonce, Taylor, Kendrick, Adele transcending the need for the Grammys, I do think there's always going to be this, quite thirsty, for lack of a better term, B-list ready to ascend to the A level. And I think you really saw that with Sam Smith, but also with someone, especially like Lizzo, who really was like, all right, I'm going to take this moment. And if you guys don't want to come to the award shows, like, I'm great at this.
Yeah, I thought her performance was fantastic. She, did this kind of about face where seemed like she was going to perform About Damn Time and have this whole dance party thing, but instead performed Special with this gold-clad gospel choir. And I thought it was really beautiful. It's a song that I didn't really care for on the record, but I found it really moving in the context last night. And she just seemed like someone who stepped into her moment with this real grace and sense of joy. Like, we talked about this a lot in the recaps, but like she found a way to acknowledge Beyonce without making it weird, because she also wasn't denying herself and wasn't kind of shying away from her own moment. Like she managed to both stand in the spotlight and also acknowledge her forebears in a way that didn't feel uncomfortable or sort of self-abnegating. So I thought she really handled herself beautifully last night, and she looked amazing.
We'll go out on some bit of that performance of Special by Lizzo. But I did have one additional thought about her, which is in her speech, she talked about, and quite convincingly, I thought, especially coming from a position of being fairly skeptical of myself, the radical idea of making positive music kind of in the face of everybody telling you not to. No one else around you is making it. People are saying, oh, as a Black woman, maybe don't make this kind of music. Oh, don't make music about positivity and body inclusivity. Like, don't do this. Don't. To me, it dovetailed a little bit with what I was thinking about the idea of kind of like, who's a rebel and who's getting brought in, coming in out from the cold as a rebellion. And I do think part of the initial friction of Lizzo's kind of like pop breakthrough 2, 3, 4 years ago probably did boil down to just a little bit of a head scratch of like, who's this for? And I feel like you see conversations about who Lizzo music is for in terms of race, in terms of gender, so on and so forth. You see these conversations happening all the time. But I do think that there was a little bit of disconnect, specifically because of this choice that she said she made after Prince's death to make music that was relentlessly, unabashedly, and frankly, sometimes awkwardly positive. And yet, using the tools that many Grammy winners before her have used, using a commitment. The Lizzo album is a very, very, it's not that different from the Harry Styles record, to be honest, in terms of the genres and the time periods that it mines. But if you are willing to extend a little bit of grace to the idea that she is sneaking a radical idea of positivity into there is something quite moving about positioning herself, knowing she's on the outside and still using a toolkit that's available to her to end up on the Grammy stage, beating Beyonce, but not apologizing to Beyonce for winning that category. And I was struck by that. And I feel like really made a strong case, both in that speech and in her performance for, to Joe's point, we're going to be seeing a lot of Lizzo at the Grammys for the next X amount of years. That seems clear. So we'll go out with her performance of Special. JP, appreciate you. LZ, appreciate you. Joe, appreciate you. That's our show. Listen to every podcast ever at nytimes.com/podcast. Email us, podcast@nytimes.com. Get in the Facebook group, get in the Discord, tinyurl.com/ Popcast Facebook /Popcast Discord. Subscribe anywhere you get your audio content, Apple, wherever else. Our producer on short notice is Pedro Rosado from Headstepper Media with a quick turnaround this week. We'll be back next week.
Could you imagine a world where everybody's the same? And you could cancel a girl because she just wanted to change.